Let's talk watercolor tools and techniques. I work with Arch's 140-pound cold press paper. There are other paper brands out there, but I found that this brand works the best for me and the way I work with watercolor. An equally as good and cheaper alternative to Arch's is 𝕤𝕒𝕤𝕤𝕤. There are three types of watercolor paper: hot press, cold press, and rough. To save time, I will only describe cold press, and hot press and rough paper will be on the screen. Cold press is when the paper has texture to it. It isn't smooth or flat. This paper is a popular choice with watercolor artists and easiest to work with on creating texture and value. It is good for both not only large areas of wash, but also fine detail. The thickness of watercolor paper is indicated by its weight, measured either in grams per square meter or pounds per ream. The standard machine weights are 90 pounds, 140 pounds, 260 pounds, and 300 pounds. The most common weight used is 140 pounds. This weight is able to handle just enough lifting and layering without falling apart, but will need to be stretched and taped down to avoid warping. It's recommended to use a sealed board to stretch your paper onto. It will provide the most even and stable surface. I bought a wooden board from Home Depot, cut it down to size, and painted on 3 layers of matte Mod Podge. Let's talk about the right brushes for watercolor painting. You want a brush that has a tapered tip and it spreads out easily when pressure is applied. That goes for every brush type, even wide brushes. This shape will allow for you to reach into small edges for detail, as well as covering as much surface area as possible when doing washes. Synthetic brushes will get the job done, but they fray easily and quickly, ruining the perfect point. But because of their cheap price, they'll be easy to replace. An ideal brush brand is Kolinsky brushes. Although very expensive, they are very worth it. They are made of genuine Sable-Hair and last a long time if properly taken care of. As for watercolor paints, I haven't experimented with many brands, so I will have advice only on what I know. For a starter, I would recommend what I used, Winsor Newton Cotman Travel Kit set of 12. It comes with all the necessary colors, and they're great enough quality to get amazing paintings out of. Winsor Newton has 2 watercolor lines, the Cotman and Professional. The Cotman paints are just student grade paints and are cheaper. A favorite brand of watercolor of mine is also unfortunately one of the most expensive, Daniel Smith. The paints are incredibly pigmented and a little bit of paint goes a long way. It can easily be mixed with other paint brands and I found it to be very well worth the money. When sketching on your watercolor paper, you want to use the softest lead and a light touch without too much erasing. You want to preserve the paper as much as possible. Hard leads will ingrain the paper, making it show up when you add paint. I generally start my paintings with washes, as you can see here. This is to help me map out my color palette and lighting. They are generally light at the start and I continue to build up where there is shadow or darker tones. The blue you see on the moon is drawing gum, also called masking fluid. This is a peelable rubber solution used to keep areas color-free until I am ready to peel it off. It can be applied with a brush or a pen, but make sure you're using a spare brush as it is impossible to clean out. Some examples of using masking fluid in paintings is to keep the white of the paper for the whiskers of an animal, snow falling, large areas of shine, flowers in the field, and so on. Watercolor is known for its ugly stages. You just need to persevere and keep building your colors. I like to add white or pale yellow gouache to my paintings to bring back any white paper I had lost on the way. It helps bring the piece back to life by having values and contrast return.
Ride to school together. When you get mad at me, I gotta give you flowers. But I don't like flowers. Oh. How about Twinkies? My mom won't ever buy them. Okay.
Typically, you want to work light to dark, as it's easier to darken an area rather than lightening it. However, the fortunate thing about watercolor is that it is very forgiving. If you are not happy with how a certain area of a piece looks, you can easily take a wet brush and rub it over the section that's bothering you. Then, take a dry towel and lift out the color. 140-pound paper should be able to stand 1 or 2 lifts. You will be teetering on the edge if you try to go for your 4th lift.
Your dad plays for the worst team in the NBA. What? Last time they won, Dr. J was a nurse.
For easy texture to mimic the pattern of stars or water droplets if you're painting an ocean, is to splatter white paint from a brush, usually tapping it against another brush as shown. Another easy alternative is taking a toothbrush and pulling the bristles back, letting them flick the paint forward when letting go. For the moon, I use a combination of watercolor techniques called wet on wet and wet on dry. Wet on wet is wet paper, wet brush, helping create blooming or bleeding of the colors. Much like washes, I like to do this to add base shapes on where to add detail. Wet on dry is wet brush, dry paper, typically for adding detail. After using wet on dry, I like to take some water on a plain brush and blend out any lines that I felt were too harsh. After the tape has been peeled back, I like to go in and clean up the edges with some white gouache. For this piece, I also used washes. I then used wet on dry to figure out the movement of the water, and then blended it out to get more organic transitions between shades. And naturally, I would build it up, as you will see later, to create even darker tones. My favorite part about this piece was rendering the steam from the hot bath. It was just wet on wet with very patchy application of paint. The blooming that wet on wet gives will do enough of the work for you. This is also great for making uneven paint texture of the sky to hint at some very faint clouds. When working on a watercolor painting, make sure you are aware of the weather or quality of air. The paint will dry however long depending on how damp or humid the air is. One time I tried to work on a watercolor painting outside when it was raining. Somehow, to my surprise, my paint was taking forever to dry. Usually, the paint won't take long to dry. To combat waiting for the layer to dry, I will work on a part of the painting that isn't touching any of the wet parts of the piece. I believe that very successful paintings are ones that use limited color palettes and show very well understanding of color theory, naturally. This painting here is very simple, so it has very simple 3-color scheme palette, blue, yellow, and red, at its base. Otherwise, more specifically, teal, beige, and pink. It's very easy to understand why these colors work so well together, as they are the primary colors. And as for the other painting, it was purple, blue, and yellow. Purple and yellow are complementary colors, so the piece felt cohesive and well thought out. My only warning to this is making sure you don't mix colors that will contain all 3 primary colors. This can result in a brown or dull tone. You will see this happening on the monkey's face when I try to add the blue, as the blue contains enough yellow to cause this to happen. Be smart on how and where you apply your colors. With that said, it is important to use warm and cool tones expertly. Using cool tone shadows on a warm tone base helps create a dynamic piece and pushing certain parts of the object further back. You can see this is what I attempted to do under the monkey's eyebrows and parts of the fur to create depth. It's important to have different sized brushes on hand. Not only do different sized brushes help you achieve different levels of texture and coverage, they can also help get different textures because of what they can fill at their size. And now we're reaching the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I really hope I helped teach you guys something. I took watercolor class for my last semester of college, and I really learned a lot. I'm hoping to have carried some of that knowledge to anyone who's watching. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to answer. Have fun painting.